Welcome to Mad Blood. I'm Matt McFarland, and today I'm going to be talking to you about 5 must-watch winter horror movies that you should definitely watch this year for sure. These are just movies that when I think about them just have that cold, isolated, creepy feel to them that I enjoy year-round, but you should definitely watch this winter for sure. So we are going to be starting off, and this is in no particular order or anything like that. We're going to be starting off with one of my favorite vampire movies of all time, which is called 30 Days of Night. So this movie has a really damn cool setting. I remember before watching this movie for the first time, I was like, that's a really cool idea for a movie, especially a vampire movie. Hell yeah. So essentially the movie takes place in a place called Barrow, Alaska, which is the northernmost city in the entire United States. And if you know about these types of places, essentially, it's dark for 30 days during a certain portion of the year. And these people, a lot of the town is kind of leaving for this 30-day time period. There's like, fuck this, dude. I'm not staying in the dark. I cannot handle this. You know what I mean? I need my vitamin D. I'm out this. So a lot of people are leaving, but there's definitely some people that are left behind intentionally and unintentionally as well. But and then essentially vampires take over the place because, vampires don't like the sun. So this is a great place to be during that time of year. But just this movie has great characters for sure. It doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion. The characters, Josh Hartnett. It's got Melissa George in the movie as well, who kind of plays like his wife, ex-wife kind of a situation. But both great characters. I forgot to mention as well, this movie is from 2007. And I'm a sucker for horror movies that take place kind of during that time period. But it also gives you that vampire feel that's just more scary and gritty and more evil than a lot of other vampire movies that play it a little bit more tame. That's something I definitely love about this movie for sure. But it's, like I said, it's just got a great cast. It's got actors who are mainstream to a certain extent, but it's also got all these village members who do a really good job in their roles as well and are believable that they would live in a small, isolated town like this. It's got great violence. This movie is bloody as hell, and the vampires, like I mentioned, are creepy. Just the way they look, the way they act, they speak in this foreign dialect, and throughout the entire movie, you're also kind of wondering, what is their objective here? What are they trying to do other than eat people? What's their origin? Where do they come from? Why are they here? And they're also kind of brought to this place by somebody who's human as well. So you're wondering about his story too. But overall, 30 Days of Night, highly recommend this movie. This is another movie where Rotten Tomatoes, in my opinion, kind of shit the bed on. They give them I think it's a 51% for this movie, which is, probably something that the general audience gave. But if you're into cold, dark, isolated horror movies, definitely check out 30 Days of Night from 2007. All right, up next is a Stephen King adaptation, one of the best ever, and it's Misery from 1990. If you're looking for a winter, cold, creepy, disturbing movie to watch this year, Misery has to be on the list. I mean, I'm a sucker for 90s horror movies as well, but this movie is incredible. It was directed by Rob Steiner, who directed Stand By Me, Princess Bride, A Few Good Men. Just had a hell of an 80s and a 90s directing movies for sure, but just does a really, really good job in this movie. The setting in this movie, I'm going to say this a lot, but it's just kind of like this cabin tucked away for the majority of the movie in this sleepy, quiet mountain town where nothing really happens, but shit is definitely happening in this movie for sure. But essentially this movie follows a very famous writer who goes away to this mountain town to a certain resort every single time he's going to write a book, has a very laid out routine for every time he writes his book and finishes his book, and then gets caught in a snowstorm and ends up getting into a car crash, and then is basically quote unquote rescued, I guess you could call it rescued in a way, by somebody who calls themselves his biggest fan. And this movie, very, 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 very creepy. And just the performances in this movie, my God. I mean, Jesus. Kathy Bates won an Oscar for this role. She plays the creepy, loner woman who on the surface looks like somebody who would be nice and somebody who would maybe, bake you some cookies when you're sick and just be a nice little neighbor, but has such a dark undertone to her that we find out that kind of gets kind of unveiled throughout the story. She's like a religious fanatic. She's got that element to it as well, which is super creepy. And she just plays the role perfectly. And then James Caan, as kind of like the famous writer as well, does a really, really good job in that role, playing a guy who, has that vibe of he comes from a big city, but also you find out, had kind of a backstory of he wasn't always this like rich big city guy. He comes from a little bit of a different background, but then also just does a really good job playing the victim in this. And Kathy Bates, really, I just cannot say it enough. She plays one of the best villains in any Stephen King adaptation, period. I mean, there's no debate about that in my opinion. I mean, let's talk about the hobbling scene. If you've seen the movie, the hobbling scene, it's disturbing. It's definitely a holy shit moment in the movie, but very, very good. Rotten Tomatoes gave Misery a 91%, so if that means anything to you, but this movie is not only like critically acclaimed and well received from the community, but it's just a damn good horror movie. Overall, the setting, it's got a great score to it. The acting, the revenge moments towards the end of the movie are so good, and it's definitely a must-watch winter horror movie for sure. So, up next, we are going to be talking about The Thaw from 2009. And this movie is kind of an interesting one. This is not on everybody's radar for sure. This movie almost feels like a sequel to The Thing or in the same universe as The Thing. It definitely pulls some stuff from different movies that are very similar to like The Thing and just other movies that use the whole like a hidden disease potentially ruining, mankind essentially. But the plot of this movie is you've got Val Kilmer, who's kind of the lead scientist who's up in a remote place. I think it's I think it's Canada, if I remember correctly. I forget about that, but it's a kind of a remote sort of research station. That probably sounds familiar, but they find a polar bear who's eating something, and it happens to be a woolly mammoth who is buried in the ice, who contains basically like this terrible disease of some kind, this organism that is essentially like unleashed. And they've got this team of students who are scheduled to go up there and help them with the research that they've been doing, but they don't know about what has recently happened and what they've recently discovered. And then shit goes down after that. So just really, really kind of an interesting plot, definitely pulled from some things. Especially like the whole, there's a section in the movie where there's like a helicopter sabotage scene. There's some stuff in this movie that definitely feels like a ripoff of a lot of other movies. But regardless of that, as just a winter horror movie, I think it does a really good job. It's a cool setting. I do wish it was a little bit colder, but Val Kilmer's in the movie, one of my favorite actors growing up for sure. But it's also got a very straightforward, easy to digest ending as well. It's got a little bit of a twist in there. Yeah, there's nothing really unique. And yeah, this movie only got a 23% according to Rotten Tomatoes. But to me, if you're just looking for a movie that's cold, has some creepiness, has some tension throughout the movie, I think this is a good time. Is it for everybody? No, but it's one that I would recommend. All right, coming up next, what would be a winter horror movie list without talking about The Shining from 1980? Now, I'm going to keep this kind of short and sweet because we could go down a rabbit hole about The Shining for like an hour. But Stanley Kubrick, he directed Full Metal Jacket, Clockwork Orange, Eyes Wide Shut, directed this movie, and is well known for doing take after take after take, sometimes over 100 takes in a scene to get every little detail just exactly how he wants it, or to have variations of that same take so he can pick the one that he thinks is the most perfect. But just so meticulous with every little detail in this movie. And that definitely comes across on the screen for sure. Every little detail just seems so well thought about. And when I think about The Shining, I think about just the way the movie's shot really in general. I just cannot overstate the camera work in this movie. It is so damn good. They do such a good job experimenting with shots in this movie and utilizing the hotel that they're in, which is such a massive place, but using that as a setting to show the expansiveness of this place. But you also have a suffocating feeling while you're watching the movie. It's just shot so damn well. The Steadicam was also like invented essentially shortly before this movie was made. So it was one of the first movies ever to use the Steadicam. And if you've seen this movie, the Steadicam is clearly used throughout it and used so well in some of those shots where you're following the characters kind of, along that certain scene that they're about to undertake. But just using the kind of physical things that you have with this hotel to kind of expand the creativity of the shots is just incredible. I mean, the cast here also, we can't not talk about the cast, right? With The Shining. Jack Nicholson, it's Jack, all right? He does a really, really good job in this movie. Although at times, he's a very, very physical actor in a lot of ways, almost like a Jim Carrey at times, which works for 99% of the movie. There are some moments where it's a little, I don't want to say iffy, but there are some moments where I'm kind of like, I wish he would have done that a little bit differently. But I really do think the star of this movie is Shelley Duvall. I cannot overstate her performance. I mean, shit, the hell that she had to go through while making this. Apparently, her and Stanley Kubrick were just bashing heads constantly throughout production. I mean, it took a year to make this movie because of just the thoroughness and how many things had to be rewritten and reshot just to be exactly how Kubrick wanted them to be. But Shelley Duvall, really, I could not overstate how good of a job she does in her role in this movie. But no scene feels rushed in The Shining. On the surface, you think about this movie and you're like, okay, it's 3 people taking care of a hotel. What can happen there? There's only so much that can happen there, but the uniqueness with just the ambiguity in the story and the different characters that start popping up and the almost the ghost sequences and how many conspiracy theories are around this movie and different ideas on what this movie really means. It's kind of mind-blowing to think about, and it's just an incredible movie. And I know I said I wasn't going to go down an old rabbit hole, but we kind of went down a rabbit hole a little bit. But there's a couple more things I want to mention about The Shining, and one has to do with the dialogue. The dialogue, to me, every character that talks in this movie has this weird way of never fully answering all of the questions that you might have about an interaction that they have with a person in that scene. There's almost this weird ambiguity to the conversations, this wink, wink, hint, hint kind of a thing. They don't give you everything in the dialogue, which adds this weird creepiness to it, which I think just takes the script and the movie just in general to another level. Another movie that was very well received, I'm sure you probably already knew that, 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. But I mean, geez, it's just great score. Top-notch acting, top-notch acting. Iconic lines throughout the movie that are still repeated to today. And The Shining, definitely a must-watch movie for any winter horror movie list for sure. So, and the next movie coming up, I already said The Shining is a movie that's a must-watch during any winter holiday kind of horror season during the cold winter times. But no list would be complete like this without talking about The Thing from 1982, John Carpenter's The Thing. So the plot of this movie, kind of similar to The Thaw. Obviously, The Thaw is not on the level of this movie, but it's about a research station full of men, essentially, and they come across some Norwegian people who come into their village and start shooting at this dog who has now came into their village, and they're like, what is going on here? They have to eventually just kill them to defend themselves because they don't really know why these Norwegians are acting so crazy. There's a Norwegian research station nearby. They go and, investigate the research station, see that more people have died. The research station was burned down, and they uncovered something in the ice, and they don't know what it is. And the dog that's came into their camp essentially reveals that there's an alien organism that has taken over that dog and assimilates into anything and anyone that it can, with the potential to take over the entire world, essentially, is the plot of The Thing if you haven't seen it. But it's classic Carpenter. It's moody. It's atmospheric. It's got so many creepy vibes to it. The setting, this isolated camp, in the middle of nowhere. The radios are cut off, very similar to The Shining and some of the other movies we talked about, but it's just got that whole feel to it. You know what I mean? That's so good during the winter time. It's an all-male cast, which is interesting. The characters are really, really good. The acting throughout the entire cast is damn good as well. Kurt Russell's kind of the lead, definitely in this movie, becomes the leader of the group, is not appointed by himself, but they just basically like, dude, you're the only guy who's really got his shit together, so we're just going to follow you to the end, essentially, at the end. Kind of interesting. This was Kurt Russell's one of his early roles. He was 31 at the time, and just, such an iconic character, and a character that, goes on a list for me as one of the best horror characters ever, really. The practical effects, you can't overstate the practical effects in this movie. It's already been kind of talked about ad nauseum, how good the practical effects are in this movie. Some of the best you'll ever see, even till today, all these years later. But so good. The gore in this movie also very good. This movie's very, very scary in a lot of ways. The isolation. This movie was not well received at all when it first came out. A lot of that had to do with, releasing so close to E.T., which was such a big movie talking about an alien. That's nice. That's like a good guy. An alien you'd like hang out with and play D&D with. This alien, on the other hand, hell no. Totally different type of an alien. So a very different vibe, which probably affected the success of this movie when it came out, but obviously has aged very, very well and is now considered one of the best horror movies ever made, for sure. But just the whole underlying theme in this movie of mistrust, spreading through this camp like a disease, where you can essentially, towards the end, not trust anyone. Even when there's two people only left at the end, they still look at each other and they're like, I do not trust you for a second, dude. Not for a second. But iconic lines and scenes throughout the movie. Great jump scares at certain points. I mean, the blood test scene, do we need to say any more? But The Thing from 1982, not only one of the best horror movies ever of all time, but easily one of the best winter horror movies ever made, for sure. But anyways, hope you enjoyed that list of the 5 winter horror movies that I would recommend you guys check out this year. Let me know in the comments down below what movies on this list you have already seen, what movies you're looking forward to seeing on this list, and just let me know your list of your favorite winter horror movies that you love to watch. But anyways, everybody, I'm Matt McFarland, and I will see you in the next one.